Well, hello there, my fellow green thumbs. You know, after gardening for over 3 decades, I've learned that our biggest mistakes often become our most valuable lessons. And boy, do I have some doozies to share with you today. If you've ever walked through a garden center and fallen in love with a gorgeous climbing vine, only to have it turn into your worst nightmare a few years later, this video is for you. I'm about to share 8 climbing flowers that looked absolutely stunning in the catalog, promised to solve all my vertical gardening dreams, but instead gave me years of backaches, frustrated neighbors, and structures that needed repair. Now, I'm not trying to scare you away from climbing plants, quite the opposite actually. I want to share these hard-won lessons so you can make better choices than I did. Because let's be honest, removing a well-established aggressive vine is about as fun as a root canal, and I should know, I've done both. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the 8 climbing flowers that taught me that sometimes beauty really can be a beast in disguise. Flower 1, Trumpet Vine. Let's start with the plant that taught me my first major lesson about aggressive climbers, Trumpet Vine. Now, when I first saw this beauty at the nursery, I was absolutely smitten. Those brilliant orange trumpet-shaped flowers were stunning, and the salesperson told me it would attract hummingbirds like crazy. What's not to love, right? Well, I planted one small trumpet vine along my back fence, thinking it would create a lovely natural screen and stay nicely contained. That first year it grew modestly, and I was thrilled. The second year it really took off, and I started seeing those gorgeous orange blooms. The hummingbirds did come, and I felt pretty proud of my plant choice. But by the third year I realized I hadn't planted a climbing flower, I had unleashed a green monster. This plant was sending out underground runners in every direction. I started finding new shoots popping up 10, 15, even 20 feet away from the original plant. It had somehow traveled under my fence, and was now sprouting in my neighbor's pristine vegetable garden. Mrs. Henderson next door was not amused when Trumpet Vine started climbing her prize oak tree. And let me tell you, trying to explain to your neighbor that your innocent little flower has invaded their property is not a conversation you want to have over the fence. But here's the worst part: even after I removed the main plant, I spent the next 5 years playing whack-a-mole with new shoots. Every time I thought I had it beat, up would pop another vigorous little trumpet vine baby. The root system on this plant is absolutely relentless. Now, I will say, if you absolutely must have trumpet vine, there are ways to manage it. You can plant it in a very contained area, maybe in a large pot sunk into the ground, or choose one of the newer cultivars that are less aggressive. But honestly, I've found that trumpet honeysuckle gives you the same hummingbird attracting power with much better manners. Flower 2, Japanese honeysuckle. Speaking of plants with no respect for boundaries, let's talk about Japanese honeysuckle. Now, this one really fooled me, because it starts out so innocent and smells absolutely divine. Those creamy white flowers that turn yellow have this incredible sweet fragrance, especially in the evening. It seemed like the perfect plant to cover up an unsightly chain-link fence. I should have known I was in trouble when I read that it was fast-growing and vigorous. In gardening terms, that's often code for will take over your entire yard if you let it. The first season, it grew nicely along the fence, and I was delighted with how quickly it was covering the eyesore. The second season, it completely engulfed not just the fence, but started spreading to the shrubs on either side. By the third season, it was making its way into my neighbor's prize rose garden, and the weight of all those vines was actually starting to pull down sections of my fence. But here's what really got me: trying to control this plant is like trying to hold back the ocean with your bare hands. You think you've pruned it back, you think you've gotten all the runners, and then 2 weeks later it's grown back twice as thick. Every little piece you miss somehow manages to root and spread. I spent one entire summer weekend trying to remove it completely. I thought I had won. 3 weeks later, it looked like I had never touched it. This plant has some kind of supernatural ability to regenerate from the tiniest root fragment. And don't even get me started on the birds spreading the seeds. I was finding Japanese honeysuckle seedlings sprouting up in flower beds throughout my property. It's like the plant had a master plan to colonize my entire half-acre. If you love the idea of honeysuckle, and I don't blame you because the fragrance really is wonderful, try our native coral honeysuckle instead. It has beautiful red tubular flowers, attracts hummingbirds just as well, and actually knows how to behave itself in a garden setting. Flower 3, Wisteria. Now, I know some of you are going to gasp when I mention this next one, because wisteria is absolutely gorgeous when it's in full bloom. Those cascading clusters of purple flowers are honestly breathtaking, like something out of a fairy tale. And that's exactly the problem. I got so caught up in the romantic vision of wisteria draped over a pergola that I completely ignored the practical realities. I planted Chinese wisteria, thinking it would create this beautiful canopy over my back patio pergola. The nursery worker assured me it would be stunning and showed me pictures of established wisteria that looked absolutely magical. What they didn't mention was that wisteria vines can grow as thick as tree trunks and have incredible twisting strength. For the first few years I was patient. Everyone told me wisteria takes time to establish and bloom. Year 3, Year 4, Year 5, still waiting for those promised cascades of flowers. Meanwhile, the vines were getting thicker and heavier every season. By year 6, I started noticing that my pergola posts were no longer perfectly vertical. The wisteria had twisted and grown so vigorously that it was actually torquing the wooden structure. Those thick woody vines were slowly but surely pulling my pergola apart. When the flowers finally did come in year 7, they were gorgeous for about 3 weeks. But was 3 weeks of beauty worth 6 years of waiting and a damaged structure? Especially when some years it just decides not to bloom at all, leaving you with nothing but a massive heavy woody vine taking up space. The final straw came when I got an estimate for repairing the pergola. The contractor took one look at the twisted support beams and said I'd basically need to rebuild the whole thing. All because I fell in love with a picture of wisteria in bloom without thinking about the engineering requirements. Now I'm not saying all wisteria is bad. American wisteria is much less aggressive and more reliable about blooming. But if you're considering wisteria, make sure you have a structure that can handle what is essentially a small tree growing sideways, and be prepared for a long-term commitment that may or may not give you the payoff you're hoping for. Flower 4, 5-leaf Akebia. This next mistake taught me never to trust a plant that's marketed as a well-behaved alternative. 5-leaf Akebia was sold to me as the perfect solution: attractive foliage, interesting chocolate-scented flowers, and supposedly much more manageable than other vigorous vines. The leaves really are lovely, these delicate 5-fingered leaflets that create a nice texture. And those little purple flowers do have a subtle chocolate fragrance, though you have to get pretty close to notice it. For the first couple of seasons, I was quite pleased with my choice. But then I started noticing new Akebia plants popping up in unexpected places. At first I thought maybe I had forgotten where I planted things, but then I found shoots coming up 20 feet away from the original plant, then in my perennial border, then under my deck. Turns out, Akebia spreads through underground runners just like Trumpet Vine, but it's more sneaky about it. Those runners can travel quite a distance before sending up new shoots, so you don't realize what's happening until you suddenly have Akebia everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. It was seeding itself too, thanks to birds eating the small fruits and depositing seeds throughout my garden and the surrounding area. Within 3 years, I had Akebia seedlings in my lawn, my vegetable garden, and even in cracks in my driveway. The growth is incredibly dense too. It creates such a thick mat that it smothers everything growing underneath it. I had planted it to cover a chain-link fence, and it did that beautifully. But it also killed the established perennials I had planted in front of the fence by blocking all the sunlight. Removing it was a 3-year project. Every time I thought I had gotten all the roots, up would pop more shoots. I'm still finding the occasional Akebia plant trying to establish itself in random spots around my property. The lesson here is to be very skeptical when any plant is described as a better behaved version of something else. Often it's just better at hiding its aggressive tendencies until it's too late. Flower 5. Dutchman's pipe. Now here's a plant that fooled me with its impressive foliage and supposed butterfly benefits. Dutchman's pipe has these enormous heart-shaped leaves that create a really dramatic tropical look. I planted it thinking it would be perfect for covering an unsightly utility area and attracting butterflies to my garden. The leaves really are spectacular. Some of them get as big as dinner plates, and the plant grows quickly, which initially seemed like a great thing. I was thrilled with how rapidly it covered the area I wanted to hide. But those enormous leaves create problems I hadn't anticipated. First, they're so large and grow so densely that they create deep, dark shade underneath. I mean complete shade. Nothing can grow under this plant. All the existing perennials I had planted in that area slowly died off from lack of light. The weight of all those huge leaves is another issue. The vines got so heavy that they started pulling down sections of my fence. I had to install additional support posts just to handle the load. And in storms, those big leaves act like sails, creating tremendous wind resistance that puts even more stress on whatever structure the plant is growing on. As for the butterfly benefits I was promised, well, that turned out to be somewhat misleading. The plant is supposed to attract swallowtail butterflies, but it turns out they prefer the native species of Dutchman's pipe, which is much harder to find at nurseries. In all the years I had this plant, I never saw the butterflies I was hoping for. And about those flowers, they're certainly unusual. They're hidden under all that foliage and shaped like tiny pipes, which is where the plant gets its name. But here's something nobody mentioned. They smell terrible up close. It's this musty, unpleasant odor that's supposed to attract flies for pollination. So I ended up with a massive heavy vine that killed everything underneath it, required extra structural support, didn't attract the butterflies I wanted, and had smelly flowers hidden under all that foliage. Not exactly the garden asset I was looking for. Flower 6 Chocolate Vine. Speaking of misleading names, let's talk about chocolate vine, which is often just another name for the same Akebia I mentioned earlier. The nursery sold this to me a few years after my first Akebia experience, and I fell for it because of the appealing name and the promise of chocolate-scented flowers. The chocolate scent is real, but it's much more subtle than you'd expect from the name. You really have to stick your nose right into the flowers to detect it, and honestly it's more of a musty, earthy smell than anything you'd want to eat. But the real problem is that this is essentially the same aggressive plant I had already learned to regret. Same underground runners, same prolific seeding, same tendency to pop up everywhere you don't want it. I think what frustrated me most about this purchase was that I should have known better. I had already learned my lesson about Akebia, but the different marketing name and the romantic description of chocolate-scented flowers made me think this was something different. This taught me an important lesson about doing my research and not just trusting common names or marketing descriptions. Scientific names matter, and if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Within 2 seasons, I was dealing with the same issues all over again. Runners spreading throughout my garden, seedlings popping up everywhere, and a plant that was much more interested in taking over territory than providing the ornamental value I was hoping for. Flower 7. Hardy Passion Vine. This next mistake was all about getting caught up in the exotic beauty of a plant, without considering the practical implications. Hardy Passion Vine has these absolutely incredible flowers. They're like nothing else in the garden. These intricate, almost alien-looking blooms with elaborate patterns and structures that stop people in their tracks. The added bonus was supposed to be edible fruit. Who doesn't want a dual-purpose plant that's both ornamental and productive? It seemed like the perfect addition to my edible landscape plans. The flowers really are stunning when they appear. They're conversation starters, and I loved having something so unique in my garden. But here's what I learned. Beautiful flowers don't make up for a plant that's determined to colonize your entire property. Hardy Passion Vine spreads through underground suckers just like Trumpet Vine and Akebia, but somehow it seems even more determined. I'd find new shoots popping up in my lawn, which meant I was constantly having to mow around passion vine plants or dig them out before mowing. The fruit production was disappointing too. Instead of the plump, flavorful passion fruits I was envisioning, I got mostly small, seedy fruits that weren't particularly tasty. Certainly not worth the hassle of managing such an aggressive plant. And if you live in an area with cold winters like I do, there's another issue. The top growth dies back completely, leaving you with what looks like a bunch of dead sticks covering your fence or trellis for months. Then in spring it comes back even more aggressively than before, as if the winter dieback just makes it more determined to spread. I spent 3 seasons trying to keep this plant contained to the area where I wanted it. Every summer was a constant battle of cutting runners, digging up unwanted shoots, and trying to train it to stay where I put it. Finally I admitted defeat and removed it entirely, but I'm still finding the occasional passion vine shoot trying to establish itself years later. Flower 8 Wild Grape. My final cautionary tale is about wild grape, and this one really should have been obvious. I mean, it has wild right in the name, which should tell you something about its behavior in a garden setting. I was drawn to the idea of a native plant that would provide beautiful fall-color grape clusters for wildlife, and vigorous growth to quickly cover a large area. All of those things sounded perfect for covering a long section of fence quickly and naturally. Wild grape delivered on all those promises, maybe a little too well. When they say vigorous growth, they mean this plant can grow 50 feet or more in a single season, and it's incredibly heavy. All those vines and leaves create a tremendous load. I learned this the hard way when a section of my wooden fence couldn't handle the weight and came crashing down during a summer storm. But that wasn't even the worst of it. The vine had also climbed up the side of my house and gotten into the gutters, pulling them loose and causing water damage. The grapes themselves were a disappointment for human consumption. They're tiny and mostly seed with very little flesh. I suppose they're fine for wildlife, but they're certainly not something you'd want to harvest for yourself. But the real problem started the following year. Birds had eaten those grapes and distributed seeds throughout my property and beyond. I started finding wild grape seedlings everywhere, in my flower beds along my driveway, in my vegetable garden, even in my neighbors' yards. Each of those seedlings, if left alone, would grow into another massive vine. I've been pulling wild grape seedlings for years now, and I still find them regularly. It's like the plant has a mission to establish itself in every possible location. The removal process was a nightmare too. Those vines get incredibly thick and strong, and they intertwine with everything around them. I had to cut them into manageable sections, but even then each piece was heavy and difficult to handle. Looking back on all these planting mistakes, I realize they've made me a much better gardener. Each failed experiment taught me something valuable about plant behavior, garden planning, and the importance of choosing the right plant for the right place. The most important thing I've learned is that just because a plant is beautiful doesn't mean it belongs in your garden. Every plant needs to earn its place not just through beauty but through good behavior, appropriate size, and compatibility with your maintenance style and garden goals. I hope my hard-won experience can save you some of the backaches, frustration, and neighbor relations that I've had to deal with. There are so many wonderful, well-behaved climbing plants out there that you really don't need to risk the aggressive ones. Remember, gardening should bring you joy, not stress. If a plant is causing you more problems than pleasure, it's time to say goodbye and find something better. Your future self will thank you for making thoughtful choices now. I'd love to hear about your own planting mistakes and successes in the comments. We're all learning together, and sharing our experiences helps everyone become better gardeners. What climbing plant disasters have you dealt with? And what are your favorite well-behaved climbers? Let me know below. If this video has saved you from making any of these mistakes, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want more practical, real-world gardening advice from someone who's made plenty of mistakes so you don't have to, consider subscribing to Senior Green Thumbs. Until next time, remember, learn from my mistakes, choose your plants wisely, and keep growing. Happy gardening, everyone.